Human trafficking has become a big area of concern not only in Western Massachusetts but across the country. According to the Department of Homeland Security, traffickers use force or fraud to coerce their victims, often into the commercial sex trade. Tonight, we hear from a married mom who's also a survivor of human trafficking. Nikki Bell has been sharing her story to help other victims find a way out, and Carolee McGrath has her story.
Say school, school.
Nikki Bell is head over heels in love with her baby boy. He keeps her running, and it's a constant balancing act between work and home. But somehow, she manages to get it all done.
I have a husband that loves me and is really supportive of me, which is incredible. And I am the mother to an 18-month-old son, Sebastian, who is as strong-willed as I am, which is challenging. But my life is good today.
But it wasn't always, she says. Nikki is a survivor of human trafficking. For years, she was victimized by men who would sell her for sex. The trauma began when she was just a teenager.
Ended up, getting a job at a local restaurant, and the woman that worked with there had like an older son, and he started paying attention to me, and it felt good. I was a teenage girl. It felt like nobody noticed me, and so like he, I thought this man was my boyfriend, and he, turned into a sexual relationship, and I often say he was my boyfriend, but the reality was he was like 32 years old and I was 16. So he wasn't, he was grooming me for what was to come next, And so I ended up getting, he took me to a hotel one night and sent me in to take care of his friend, he called it.
And she says that was the entrance into a dark life. At 18, Nikki found herself pregnant. She went out to California, where she gave her baby up for adoption.
Was prescribed opiates after childbirth, and I ended up coming back with an opiate habit, not recognizing I had an opiate habit. And the first place I went was to my trafficker, and took me to this really crappy hotel, and I took my clothes off, and I wasn't 16 anymore, and I had stretch marks, and just had a baby. And I just remember being looked at like I was such a, not even worthy of sale anymore,
Nikki, who was in and out of prison, is now sharing her story to help other victims of human trafficking. She spoke recently at an MGM-sponsored event, the Western Mass Business Coalition Against Human Trafficking. She told those in the business community to watch out for signs that traffickers are using their businesses, such as hotels or bus stations or train stations. She also talked about the need to offer assistance to victims.
A lot of times, too, it's not just, what ends up happening is it's not just prostitution charges on their record, right? So oftentimes, trafficking victims are forced to carry guns, are forced to carry drugs for their traffickers. So women get out and they have like a whole slew of criminal charges on their record, right? But they're trying to better their lives, right? So, give somebody a chance.
Statistics show that most prostitutes were abused as children, either physically or sexually, and many were trafficked in their early teens.
Average age of entry into life is like 14 to 16 years old. So for most, that wasn't my experience, but for most, it's before you're even legally old enough to consent for sex, to have sex, never mind be sold for sex, right?
Back in the fall, Hamden District Attorney Anthony Gallooni announced a new human trafficking enforcement and education initiative, joining forces with the Hamden County House of Correction and others in law enforcement to focus on the demand side, or the Johns, and to treat prostitutes as victims and not criminals. The initiative came out of the Springfield Police Department's C3 South End unit, headed up by Sergeant Brian Beliveau. He says residents and businesses reported prostitution as a big problem. After hearing Nikki Bell speak at a conference, he left with a different perspective on how to deal with it.
Those kinetic operations are what people, they want to see. They want to see the arrest being generated, but we weren't doing anything to actually change the problem. So by shifting our focus to looking at prostitution as a victimization model and looking at the addiction issues, mental health issues, homelessness concerns, all of those things that went along with it, and actually providing wraparound resources to those who were actually working down here, we just thought that subsequently that would be our kind of end around to reducing the demand.
And now residents, healthcare professionals, and businesses are partnering with law enforcement to stem the tide.
When we first started this group, focusing on the local businesses, it was easy to think about, okay, well, hotels are going to want to be involved, probably transportation because people are getting moved by buses and through train stations and things like that.
But, especially when you bring in the demand side, when you have employees purchasing sex from people that are trafficked, it really puts every business at risk. So it really broadens it out a lot, where if you have employees that are purchasing sex and doing so on your property or on your dime or while traveling for business, it's a huge risk to a business.
But it's the human cost that business leaders, law enforcement, and advocates agree that's the greatest. Nikki, who spent 10 years in and out of prison, says she'll always be in recovery for both the trauma she experienced being trafficked and for her addiction to opioids. She has committed herself to helping other women break free from the life that robbed her of precious years. She founded a nonprofit in Worcester called LIFT, or Living in Freedom Together, a resource for women who have been sexually exploited. And she says she wants other victims to know that there's a way out.
I thought my best case scenario was going to be like living in one of the crappy rooming houses in the city of Worcester, maybe getting public assistance and that was that. That was honestly best case scenario for me. So it's every day I wake up really grateful.